The young woman stood next to the crib, peering at the sleeping baby. She couldn't bear the child and was ready to lose her cool. Of course, she didn't mean to harm the baby, but Sophia was quite fed up, especially with her mind clouded by alcohol. This child served as a painful reminder that her husband had been married before, and this baby was the result of their past love. Sophia felt anger every time she looked at the child, but she had no choice but to endure Christina's antics, even though she didn't want to. Sophia wished for her own kids as son or daughter with Adrian, and she didn't care about what would happen to Christina. Frustrated, Sophia left the nursery for the kitchen, where she received a message from her spouse and started setting the table. She prepared a meal and brewed some coffee while glancing out the window. Soon his car appeared, and she flinched, unsure why she reacted that way. She had been anticipating this moment to have a much-needed conversation. Sophia had tried to start this conversation before, but fear always held her back. She was afraid that if she gave him an ultimatum, her or the girl, he might leave her. She didn't want to share a roof with his child from his previous marriage, even though she had no connection to the girl. Adrian entered the apartment, shaking off the snow from his coat, which instantly melted onto it. He was covered in snow, even though it was only a short walk from the car to the entrance. After removing his boots, he went straight to the shower to warm up. And when he emerged, he changed into fresh clothes and made his way to the kitchen. Sitting down at the table, Adrian appeared far from cheerful. In fact, he had been in a sour mood lately, with work problems piling up and affecting his family life. He glanced at his wife, knowing she was about to start an uncomfortable conversation that wouldn't make him happy. Adrian brought the coffee closer and took a sip, immediately noticing she'd forgotten the sugar. She sat across from him, looking at him as if he should have known what this conversation would be about. "Adrian, we're a young family. We should live on our own," she said, addressing her husband. She wanted him to make the decision himself, and desperately hoped he'd agree to take care of the girls somehow, even if it meant not having children of their own. She just wanted to be alone with Adrian and get rid of the constant reminder of his late wife. "Really, Adrian, we should have our own children or just be a couple. She's a complete stranger to me. Why do we need someone else's child in our home? You don't even deal with her. You don't interact or communicate with her at all. Why should I be the one dealing with it?" she pressed, urging him to see her perspective. Adrian replied calmly, "Well, let's start with the fact that you're a woman." He felt anger brewing inside him, irritated by his wife's repeated conversations on this topic. It seemed she would continue until the very end. He continued, "Why do I have to listen to all this right now? You stay home all day, and I provide for you. All you're required to do is clean the house, cook meals, and take care of the child. That's it. Instead of saying thank you for my constant hard work, I have to listen to your complaints." Sophia, exasperated, retorted, "Yeah, whatever, Adrian. What complaints? I just want us to be a happy family, not like we took in a girl no one wants. I understand if you actually cared for her, spent time with her. But you brought her home like a pet, and I'm stuck dealing with her." Sophia calmly expressed her frustration, though there were hints of tension in her voice, like she was on the edge of losing her cool. She had promised herself to keep the conversation civil this time, hoping to avoid the outbursts that hadn't worked in the past. She was desperate to get the girl out of their house. Their talk grew louder and more intense, and the little girl, whom Sophia thought was asleep, was actually wide awake. She cracked her door open and overheard the heated discussion in the kitchen. Quietly, she dialed her father's sister's number, which she had memorized. Her aunt had made her remember it for moments like this. As Christina spoke to her aunt, Carolina, on the phone, she shared what was happening at home. Carolina listened carefully, but had her own thoughts in mind. She assured the little girl that she would handle everything and told her not to worry. Carolina also instructed Christina to delete the call from the phone to keep it a secret. Christina hung up, erased the call, and returned to her room, still hearing her parents argue in the kitchen. She didn't understand her place in their lives. She loved her mom dearly, but she wasn't there anymore. All she had was her dad, who seemed indifferent, and her stepmother, who couldn't stand her. In her room, Christina tried to distract herself, clutching her favorite toy her mom had given her. She tried to fall asleep, all the while hearing her parents' unpleasant conversation in the background. The discussion in the kitchen continued, causing discomfort for everyone involved. The man grew increasingly irritated. After a long and exhausting day at work, he just wanted peace and a quiet evening, free from arguments. He couldn't care less about what Sophia wanted to discuss. But Sophia was determined to finish the conversation, stating, "Adrian, you said you loved me when we got together, and you promised there would be no mention of the past. Instead, you brought a girl into our home. I want you to understand that she doesn't belong here. Can't you see it? What will become of her as she grows up? Do you know what happens to girls who live in a family where they're unwanted? They end up pregnant at 15. I don't want her burdening us with a child in the future because that's what will happen. She's not needed here. Don't your late wife's relatives have someone who could take her in?" Adrian was surprised that Sophia hadn't erupted into hysteria yet. The conversation continued, and she remained composed. Evidently, this talk was truly significant to her. "I'm her father, so it's my responsibility to take care of her. But I don't have time because I work. You're a woman. It's your job to take care of the kids. Besides, I'm not interested in having more children. So, if you want kids, we won't have any more together. You already have a child," Adrian replied somewhat rudely. He grabbed his plate of food and retreated to the living room, turning on the TV to drown out his wife's words. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sophia sat at the table, her face buried in her hands. She had hoped this conversation would change things, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Time had passed, and her attempts to break through this wall had failed. She glanced at her husband, who shook his head in disagreement. Feeling defeated, she stood by the doorway, wondering if she would ever succeed. The answer eluded her. Cleaning up the kitchen, she put away the food and then went to bed, wrapping herself in a blanket and quickly falling asleep. Late into the night, the man sat on the couch, haunted by his wife's words echoing in his mind. He partly agreed with her. The girl wasn't wanted in their home. Yet, he couldn't just send her away to an orphanage. Days passed, marked by a biting cold that arrived unexpectedly early. Winter had come with a fierce chill, freezing everything in its grasp. The man kissed his wife goodbye and ventured into the snowstorm, bundling up against the icy winds. His wife watched, worried about his journey. Lately, she had been preoccupied with thoughts of his ex-wife's fate, a tragic car accident that left him with their daughter. The girl's presence in their home irked Sophia. She and her husband had agreed to send her away to a boarding school once she grew older. But Sophia didn't want to wait. Frustrated, she poured herself wine, trying to cope with the situation. Meanwhile, the little girl, half awake, stumbled in the dark, knocking over a glass and Sophia's favorite mug. Sophia's temper flared unexpectedly. She scolded the girl, her anger boiling over. Eventually, in her frustration, she locked the girl out on the icy balcony, leaving her alone in the freezing night. The little girl was only wearing a thin tank top, and in that cold weather, she quickly felt the freezing chill. What happened next is too scary to even think about. Adrian had a really tough day at work that drained him emotionally. To cope, he met up with an old friend, went to a bar, danced with young girls, and only after that did he go home. It felt like a little break, a sigh of relief. His exhaustion had built up so much that he couldn't see anything around him. Work, constant fights with his bosses, pending projects. It was overwhelming. Tired, he looked around. The snow-covered city made him feel sad. He longed for the time when he was married, working from home, his ex-wife taking care of the child, bringing him sandwiches while he worked. They used to sit on the balcony in the evenings, wrapped in blankets, sipping coffee while the little one slept in the cradle. But after his wife's death, he stopped feeling anything for the little girl. It was as if all his emotions towards her vanished. The car was parked near the entrance, but he couldn't bring himself to get out. He wished he could go back to the past, to be happy again. He loved his ex-wife deeply, mourned her when she passed, and that pain lingered within him. He finally got out of the car, entered the building, climbed the stairs to the apartment, and went inside. When Adrian returned from work, he saw a horrifying scene. The living room was in shambles. His intoxicated wife and her friend lay on the couch, but their child was nowhere to be found. The balcony door was wide open. Panicked, Adrian rushed to the balcony and saw small footprints and abandoned shoes. He shook his wife, trying to get answers, but she was unresponsive. He closed the balcony door, feeling a mix of shock and confusion. Adrian decided not to take any drastic steps until his wife sobered up. He forced her into a cold shower, gave her coffee, and repeated the process until she could talk properly. She was shivering and still couldn't explain what had happened. He left his wife alone and returned to the living room, leaving her with her friend. Adrian was shocked by what had happened. He couldn't sleep until 4 a.m., realizing he had to work the next day, or rather that day. He kept wondering where his daughter could be. Sophia could only speak clearly by 6 in the morning. Adrian couldn't fathom why she felt so terrible. He was afraid to imagine the mess they had gotten into. Sophia said his sister had taken little Christina. Adrian froze, not understanding why Caroline was involved. Without dealing with his wife, he quickly got ready and went to work. Throughout the day, he couldn't shake the need to visit Caroline and have a proper conversation with her. After work, despite the heavy snowfall, Adrian drove to his sister's place at the other end of the city. He parked near her familiar house, knocked on the gate, shivering in the cold. Caroline appeared at the doorstep, a beautiful young woman with long braided hair. She led her brother inside, and he explained he couldn't stay long due to the snow. Adrian questioned why Caroline had taken Christina in the first place. She told him that a few days ago, Christina had called her, saying her stepmother was tormenting her. When Caroline arrived, she found the girl in a terrible state because Sophia had put her on the icy balcony in just a tank top. Caroline quickly took Christina to the hospital, wrapping her in a fur coat to warm her up. Meanwhile, Sophia was busy getting drunk with her friend, completely unaware of what was happening. The doctor assured them that Christina would be fine, but they needed to keep her under observation due to severe hypothermia. Caroline couldn't understand Adrian's calm reaction. She was furious that he hadn't protected his daughter. A real father, she thought, would have confronted his wife for nearly killing their child. Despite her frustration, Adrian didn't say anything, leaving his sister to question his lack of action. He told his sister, "I even agreed that we would send her to a boarding school once she reached school age, but apparently she decided not to wait. We understand that we don't need her," Adrian said honestly. Carolina was shocked but chose not to argue. She changed the subject, deciding that if Adrian didn't want the girl, she would raise her herself. She found herself in a similar situation in her own childhood when she was unwanted by her family. Adrian came back home the next day after work, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He looked at his wife, who was clearly worried about him. They hugged each other in the hallway, and she confessed her love for him. They spent a lovely evening together, talking, watching TV, and eventually making love before falling asleep. Carolina, on the other hand, stood outside the hospital, waiting for her niece. When she saw Christina being brought towards her, she entered the building. She signed the necessary papers, picked up the little girl, and carried her to the car. Christina felt safe with her aunt, not her stepmother, and began crying when she thought about going back. Carolina reassured her, saying they wouldn't return to her stepmother and father. She explained that they had decided not to take her, and she was going to be her legal guardian. Christina smiled, relieved and happy. Carolina felt a warm glow in her heart seeing the girl's happiness. In the following weeks, Carolina finalized the paperwork, becoming Christina's legal guardian. Her brother, Adrian, gladly handed over guardianship, even sending money as child support. He was willing to pay any amount as long as he didn't have to take care of the girl. In just 6 months, Christina started calling Carolina Mom. They built a life together, facing challenges but also learning from each other. Carolina helped Christina learn basic skills, and the little girl quickly became independent. She went to daycare happily, and they lived together, practically inseparable. Despite occasional disagreements, Carolina cherished the little girl and loved her dearly. The past didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Christina was safe and happy.